E4 is a goated opening to play on move 1, and in today's video, I'll be sharing 7 ideas that I wish I could have known when I first started as an E4 player. Why do we even play E4 in the first place? So F7 is the weakest pawn in Black's position, and E4, first of all, it controls the center, but also, and more importantly, it opens up your light-squared bishop and your queen to attacking possibilities on this F7 square. And so a common way the game can continue after E4 is the Smith-Morra gambit, which is after the Sicilian, White plays D4 and sacrifices his pawn for early development. Black has to be really careful or else he'll fall for this trick on F7, because now after bishop C4, if Black plays a move like bishop G4, White has a sacrifice of taking on F7, and after king takes, knight G5 wins this bishop. Now this isn't only an attack on the F7 square, but also the idea that pins work both ways. Black played bishop G4 to pin this knight to the queen, but actually this knight is also pinning this bishop because after takes, king takes, and knight G5, this bishop is suddenly attacked by the queen. This is probably the most common way to utilize this tactic of pins working both ways, but this kind of tactic can occur in any kind of position, but especially these E4 positions where this bishop comes out to pin this knight here. Staying on the theme of pins, what's the best way to deal with the pin on your queen? In a lot of my games, I'm finding that I have difficulty dealing with this pin on my queen, but in this position, there are many ways to deal with this. First of all, I can just go bishop E2, cutting off this bishop from my queen. But I would say the best way to deal with this kind of pin is by playing queen d3. Of course I can't do that right now, but I feel like bishop e2 is a little bit too passive and I'd prefer my bishop on a square like c4. Let's just say hypothetically this pawn on d2 is missing, and I've completed my development and I've castled, and now I'm still really having a lot of trouble with this pin. So I would say the best way to deal with it is by playing queen d3, because now if bishop takes, I can simply recapture without damaging my pawn structure, and now my knight is also free to move to a square like d2 for example. But now, what if I'm in this position? I don't have bishop e2 because my bishop is on c4 and I can't go back. I don't have queen d3 because there's a pawn on d3, and also my bishop here is blocking my knight. So what's the best way of dealing with this pin? Because now this knight is kind of immobilized and my queen is also immobilized because he's just going to take and ruin my pawn structure. So here, the answer is a little bit counterintuitive because I start with h3. Of course, if he takes, I'm happy because now all the pressure here is gone and my queen is in a very strong position. But what if, instead of taking, he goes back, keeping this pin and all the tension here? So now, you've been told not to do this, but the best move in this position is actually g4. The reason why everyone tells you not to push pawns in front of your king is because Black often has many attacking possibilities in front of your king. But since Black is castled on this side, it's really hard for him to attack. And now Black also has to make a decision. Is he going to sack the knight to keep this pin and maybe open up attacking possibilities, or is he just going to drop back? Either way, I'd argue that this position is equal, if not better, for White, because you see, even though these pawns might look a little bit misplaced, it's actually super strong, and now this bishop is essentially dead. This knight doesn't have any scope to h5 for example, and all the pressure here is relieved and this pin is gone. So now my knight can move freely wherever it wants without having to deal with this kind of pin. Now let's talk about opposite side castling. So White started the game out with e4, and it went into the Sicilian dragon main line. And so you see, White has castled queen side and Black has castled king side. And so when the kings are castled on opposite sides, the main, or the only idea even, is to simply push your pawns and try to checkmate your enemy king, right? So White's idea here is to go g4, h4, h5, g5, and Black's idea is something like a6, b5, a5, b4, essentially like that. But as White, as the e4 player, you have an advantage because as long as you castle queenside, you have these pawns here that are just available to be pushed and go into the enemy territory. But as for Black, now Black has to be careful because if he just carelessly goes a6, b5, then now this knight is hanging and Black only has these 2 pawns, but I have these 3 or 4 pawns even, and all these pieces pointed towards the enemy king. So unless Black plays the theory correctly, White will just checkmate him. And so if you ever find yourself in a position like this where the kings are castled on opposite sides, you have to remember to open up the center. And here the important move is d5, opening up the center and even sacrificing this pawn kind of. Because otherwise, you're simply just going to get stormed on this side. Because, for example, if you play a more passive move like bishop d7, then g4, immediately striking in the center. And then if a6, h4. And if rook c8, then h5 now. And what are you going to do about this? The engine already says that it's +1, but I could probably win this against 99% of players. Just because of how strong this attack is, and how many opportunities and files I have to attack this enemy king. The important takeaway here is to remember to, if you find yourself in a position like this, just straight up just push your pawns. If black doesn't know the theory, then you're just gonna stomp on them with their pawns, and if they do, then you have to be somewhat careful, but you're still definitely fine. A super common but tricky idea that black has is called the center fork trick, and I actually only learned about this recently, and so it's definitely worth knowing. So here, white plays kind of a casual move, just developing the bishop to c4, just like in Italian, but now black actually has a sneaky idea to sacrifice this knight on e4, because now if white recaptures, then black strikes in the center with d5. Now, this is a fork attacking both pieces, and if you're in this position, you're already slightly worse because black just has a strong center. But the important thing is to not do a desperado like sacrificing your bishop like this, because this bishop is definitely stronger than this knight here. And so instead what you would do is you just slide back your bishop to d3. Black is basically forced to take this, and now you keep the bishop pair, but you lose a little bit of your center. And so that's why it's important to not fall for this trick in the first place. And instead of playing a move like this bishop c4, you can calmly develop like bishop e2 or something. It's important to remember the pattern that if you have a position like this, don't put two pieces that could possibly get forked like this. If you're ever in a position like this where black's f-pawn is away and black's king is wide open, make sure to look out for checks. And the most common one is this queen h5 check, because now black has to make a decision. Do they want to get mated, or do they want to block the check with g6? Now this is an important pattern and a very common one, because knight takes g6 is winning in exchange like this. But now, what if there's no knight on e5? Can you still go for this check? Well, let's see. If queen h5, now g6, and simply this pawn is defended, this pawn attacks your queen, and you're forced to go back. And now, this position is not nearly as good for you because it just takes, and you don't have anything. But instead, in this position, you can simply take, and now it's the same idea. Let's say they play a random move. Now queen h5, g6, and this is even stronger because you don't have to sacrifice a piece. They're essentially forced to take this, and now you can take the rook for free. I used to have a horrible win rate against e6 and c6 until I started pushing this pawn. So e6 is the French defense, and c6 is the Caro-Kann defense. They're very positional and mostly closed positions. So the biggest advantage you have in both of these openings in the advanced variation is that you have a space advantage, because you see this pawn is like a thorn in black's position, preventing this knight f6 move and preventing anything from going to d6. And so also specifically in the French defense, black has this bishop called the French bishop because it's essentially useless for the whole game just because this pawn is blocking it. This is just a tiny disadvantage for the black players because according to the engine, black is completely fine here, but it's still something worth knowing. And so in both of these positions, black's idea is to strike on the queen side. And so you have to make sure that these pawns stay connected, so you play moves like c3. And basically, black fights for this d4 pawn, and you do your best to defend this d4 pawn. So black tries to just bring all their pieces, and now the main line goes a3. And after take here, you go b4. And the idea behind this is to stop black's queen from taking on b2, because after knight f5, you're basically forced to defend this like this. And now the Caro-Kann defense is very similar to the French, but now in the advanced variation, it's most common that this bishop opens up and goes on this strong diagonal. And so I'd recommend playing the tall variation. This is what I play. But basically in this kind of position, you keep your space advantage and you fight for like the central control. So finally, what do you do against e4 as black? In my experience, e4 players are all monkeys that are aggressive, overly tactical, and love open positions. So that's why I'd recommend playing the Caro-Kann against e4 because it's a close position and there aren't many chances for tactics, and as long as you know a little bit of theory, you'll be completely fine and get at least a draw against e4. So the most common is the advanced variation, and so you play bishop f5, and now this is a tall variation, which is just what I play, but I've seen it a lot, and so basically this is a theory, and so and here this is like one of the most closed positions I've ever seen. All the pawns are still on the board, and there are just little to no chances for tactics here. And so as if your opponent mainly plays e4 and they're like still around the beginner to intermediate level, then they'll basically kind of crumble in this position. They'll have no idea what to do. They'll just like throw their pieces at you, like for example okay, here, and you simply just, it's very simple for you. You just have very simple ideas. And if they ever try to do this break, you can just play something like this and keep the position closed. Now this file opens up, but you'll have no problem in this position. These are just 7 of the most common positions and tactical ideas that pop up as an e4 player in my experience. I'm trying something different with this video, but if you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing, and thank you for watching.